Who's ready to hunt some monsters? Thanks again to everybody for coming out. Comic-Con always shows up every year and has been for years now. And our panel 2 years ago for World was really cool, and we brought a really similar thing where we're going to show you some behind-the-scenes stuff, show you a little bit of where the game's at right now. But a lot of cool stuff to talk about. So again, thank you for coming. And real quick note, when we were here last year, Monster Hunter World had become Capcom's best-selling game of all time. And that's extremely cool. And as of even this month, if you've been following on Twitter and Instagram everywhere, you'll see that we just passed 13 million units sold worldwide. And with that came a special, an extra commendation pack. So if you log in later this month, July 25th, through the next 4 weeks, you'll get a special pack that has some items in it. One of those items is an attack gem. So joining us also from this team in Japan is Kaname Fujioka, the executive director and art director on Iceborne. And we have Ted on the end here helping us with translation today. Hi, Ted. Hi. And it's kind of summarizing again that while Monster Hunter World Iceborne is an expansion, you can either get that digitally, upgrade your Monster Hunter World directly, or there is a pack together that will be Master Edition that has World and Iceborne together. So it is much more than just, here's some new monsters and a couple of new things. It is tons of new monsters, new weapon abilities, a brand new map, Hoarfrost Reach, that as it expands over time becomes the biggest map in the game. So even at maps that you're familiar with in World like Ancient Forest, this is even bigger, more stuff going on, and as you again progress through the brand new story that picks up where World left off, you'll open new areas and find, again, tons of new monsters, new weapon abilities to play with, a lot of stuff going on. So stay tuned. We got a lot more still to show. Game's out September 6th, but what we're going to talk about here today, Fujioka-san has prepared a great presentation talking us through the subspecies that you saw in the trailer and how they are made and how we come up with those ideas. So I'll let Fujioka-san take it away.
はい、今日はモンスターハンター
First of all, thank you everybody for coming out here. I want to take this opportunity to delve into a little bit more details about how the subspecies work.
はい、まず、アシュモンスター
So with the new expansion, Iceborne, we're also adding Master Rank quests, and within the Master Rank quests, we also have the subspecies, which will be a much greater challenge than the normal version of the monsters.
通常種
The one thing that we really want to emphasize is we don't want these subspecies to just be like, hey, we're raising the parameters of the monsters, and it's the same thing. It's definitely not that. We want to always make sure that we take a look at the drawing board, we look at the concept, and really change that up and make it a more dynamic experience. So let's take an example with the subspecies for the Rathian. We wanted to really emphasize more on the physical attacks and embellish upon that. So if you take a look at the normal Rathian, it's focused primarily around ground attacks, and the special move is kind of a somersault attack. But with the subspecies of the Rathian, we wanted to focus more on the somersault attack itself and add some variation to that so that people who encounter it are like, oh, it's something different. So for the subspecies of Rathalos, because he's very much the king of the skies, we wanted to really push that home. We really strengthened its aerial attacks and really emphasized the fact that okay, you really need to bring this guy down to defeat it. So this is kind of just a few examples of how we approach subspecies, really going back to the drawing board of the concept itself and either emphasizing on a specific concept or kind of deviating it from it in order to create some more dynamic gameplay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and dive into Iceborne and go a little bit deeper dive into the subspecies for both Anjanath and Odogaron.
デザインされていったかを説明したいと思います。
All right, so let's go ahead and introduce the normal version of Anjanath first. So Anjanath very much is kind of like the first big challenge that players will encounter in the beginning of Monster Hunter World. So the way that we designed the regular Anjanath was using its big size. We wanted to make sure that okay, it's all about the physical attacks, and we wanted to make sure that when players get up to this point in the game that they understand the basic mechanics, they understand that okay, you do need to upgrade your gear in order to proceed forward. But we thought that, like, okay, if this guy only has physical attacks, then it's gonna make a not as interesting of a fight. So we decided to add a breath attack to kind of change up the gameplay as much as possible. So this is the subspecies version of the Anjanath. So I'll go into a deeper dive of how we got to this concept. So the original initial design concept was like, okay, this guy's gonna appear kind of like the midpoint of the Master Rank quest. So the first point is that we wanted to kind of heighten the physical attacks and add a bit of electricity to it. And we also wanted to make sure that, like, okay, based on player actions, you're able to kind of dictate, okay, how much electricity is stored within this monster. Because the more electricity is stored within the body, that's going to apply a thunder elemental to the Anjanath's attacks, which causes, if you get hit, then you're going to get stunned easier. So using this kind of as a foundation for, like, okay, this is how the subspecies is going to work out. So from here, it's all about, okay, what's the visualization, knowing that, like, all right, it's going to be based around thunder and electricity, and we know that the difficulties are a little bit around mid-range. So these are a couple examples of the initial concepts. What you see on the top right-hand side is kind of a thunder god motif, and what you have on the bottom left-hand side is kind of more of like a cyber kind of deep-sea monster type of motif there. So we thought that, like, the dark imagery did conjure up, like, okay, this is a more powerful monster, but we felt like, this is losing a little bit of its personality, so we felt that this wasn't quite the mid-level difficulty monster, so we ended up scrapping these ideas. So this is the final design of the Fulgur Anjanath. As you can see, we wanted to kind of emphasize the fact that it has that thunder and electricity element to it with the wings, and as well as added a little bit of a tiger stripe design to its face as well. So you might ask yourself, like, why tiger stripes? What's up with that? And it's actually a really popular design for representing the thunder and electricity. No real good translation for the name of this. There's a god called Kaminari-sama, which really kind of imbues the thunder and electricity. So this god, this Kaminari-sama, he's very often depicted with these tiger stripe pants that you see here. So the designer's like, I want that. So basically took that design and slapped it on the face. So from my perspective, I was like, okay, looks strong. Yeah, let's go with this. So now that we had the overall visual design locked into place, now it was like, okay, adding some more details, showing, like, how it does the electricity course through the body. So this is kind of a visual example of, like, okay, it's a very easy to see depiction of how the electricity and thunder courses through. The static electricity applying to the fur and the fur standing up. Oh, there we go. So that's what it's supposed to look like with the static electricity. So we also wanted to make sure that, like, okay, you can visually see that a lot of electricity is stored up in the body. And so we wanted to make that really apparent with both the nose and the wings, where you can kind of see the electricity course through. So now that you have the basic concept and design, let's go ahead and see it in action. So the Fulgur Anjanath in its normal state acts very similar to the regular Anjanath, where it's very much focused around physical attacks. So then it's all about having more of, like, the electricity build up over time, and that really takes an effect on the gameplay as well. So when it's like it's in its fully charged state, that's when it really takes on a really dangerous form. As stated before, if you get hit by the attacks with the thunder element, you have a much higher chance of being stunned, and on top of that, damage output is much higher as well. So it actually throws some snot out, and the snot's actually electrified as well. So it's very much electrocuting everything across the board, so it's up to the player to make sure that he doesn't reach this state. So now that you've seen the Anjanath in action, it also obviously applies to the armor as well. So what you see on the left-hand side in red is what you get from the normal Anjanath, and what you see on the right-hand side, we decided to change it up with a little bit more of a white motif, is the gear that you get from the Fulgur Anjanath. So we also wanted to emphasize that tiger stripes of the Kaminari-sama, so we applied those tiger stripes to the armor as well. So aside from the aesthetic changes, the armor itself is imbued with more thunder elemental skills and abilities. So it gives you a little bit more variety and mixing and matching your armor sets. And of course, the same goes with the weapons itself, where you do see some aesthetic changes, as well as it being imbued with the Thunder element.
それでは次に、
All right, so now that we're done with Anjanath, let's go ahead and move on to Odogaron. So Odogaron is very much focused on physical attacks as well as using its very specialized claws to apply a bleeding effect to the player. So what the bleeding effect does, for those of you who aren't familiar, is that the more you move, the more damage you take. So it kind of forces you to immobilize, and it uses that as an opportunity to kind of go in and do some big damage to you. And it actually has the ability to eat meat and power up as well. So what's funny is some of you players are so good. A lot of you haven't had the opportunity to see it eat meat and power up. So that's something that we were like, oh, we should take this into consideration. So taking that all into consideration, we went into the design of the Ebony Odogaron. So the main design that we took with the Ebony Odogaron was the fact that it's already in that powered up state from the very beginning. And on top of the regular Odogaron has more like pinpoint precise attacks, and we wanted to make sure to add some more variety and have some more wide range attacks to really change up the tempo of the gameplay. So with the regular one, it's like, okay, it's in its normal state, and then once it eats the meat, and then it's powered up. Whereas with the subspecies, it's very much like, okay, it's a high tempo battle from the get-go. So because it's already powered up from the get-go, it's more about playing the long game and figuring out like, okay, how do I survive this beginning state? Because it does get weaker over time, figuring out like, okay, how do I survive up until that point? But at the same time, once it's weakened, it's got that meat ready to go, so it's gonna just power itself back up. So it's all about finding out like, okay, how do I deal with this rhythm? So the Ebony Odogaron's actually weak against elemental attacks. So to compensate for it, its attacks actually apply. It actually has a dragon element to it, which seals away your elemental attacks. So this was all basically taken in, encompassed, and we're like, okay, now that we have the foundation of the design, now let's talk about the visuals. So the first kind of hiccup that we ran into was like, okay, we were gonna come up with the visuals. What in the world does dragon element look like? And that was just a huge roadblock for us. So for this time around, we actually didn't come up with the design of the monster first. We took the approach of designing the armor first. So with what you see on the top right-hand side is the base Odogaron armor. Kind of has that like Eastern flavor to it, kind of like a ninja. So we're like, okay, what about we alter it, kind of more of like a metallic look to that garment. So then we were like, okay, now that we have a general design, you see these two variations where it's like, okay, we have kind of a golden ninja or a ninja that has kind of more of a translucent, kind of opalescent look to it. So the armor itself, we were like, okay, this looks pretty good. But when we reflected the color of the armor to the monster itself, we felt like it's not quite exactly what we're looking for. It doesn't really have that feel of like, oh, this has dragon element to it. So we got to this point and we ultimately scrapped it. And fun fact, when we were designing the armor, the producer, Ryozo Tsujimoto, he loves wearing gold armor. And we figured if he's gonna get gold armor like middle of the way through, he's not gonna wanna change his armor up. So we're like, okay, we need to change this up right now. So we ran into a problem where once he defeated Call of Taroth, for those of you familiar, you get the gold armor, and he's like, I'm not changing anything up now. So with all of that discussion, this is the final armor that we ended up with, which kind of has a more blue tint to it, and it has kind of a dashes of red kind of showcased on it.
その装備のイメージ
So then we were able to reflect that armor onto the monster itself. Again, kind of having a more metallic look to it and really emphasizing more of that metallic sheen to the tail itself.
それでは実際
So let's go ahead and see it in action.
動いているかを見たいと思います
So as you can see, it has the food in its mouth. We kind of call it the lunch box. So as you can see, it kind of applies that dragon element to all of its attacks.
で、攻撃をずっと
So in the beginning, he's very vicious, very aggressive. So really have to find a way to dodge all of its attacks and wait till it gets a little bit more weakened.
この時が一番
Again, normal state is very the optimal time to do as much big damage as possible, but again, it's going to find that lunchbox and just go to town again. So yeah, that's going to be two subspecies that you'll see, the Ebony Odogaron and the Fulgur Anjanath.
ただ、まあ、せっかく今日、
But since I had a wonderful opportunity to meet you guys, I also wanted to show you something additional.
So
in Iceborne, this is going to be the first time that you see a subspecies of Glavenus. So before we go into the details of the acidic Glavenus, I just want to go ahead and brief everybody on what the regular Glavenus does. So it makes a first appearance in Monster Hunter Generations as one of the flagship monsters of the title. So one of the defining features very much is its tail, and definitely wields that as its main weapon. So during all the attacks, the tail starts to get more and more heated up, and once it's in its like really maxed heated state, that's when the Glavenus is most dangerous. So the tail does get heated up, but over time it also starts to build up some rust. So what it does is it uses its jaw and sharpens its tail to take off all that rust off. So when it sharpens its tail and takes off all the rust, it also builds up heat within its mouth. So it has that combo of having a fiery breath on top of the bladed tail. So the game cycle behind the regular Glavenus was that we wanted to have the combo between the fiery breath and the tail. But for the subspecies of the Glavenus, we wanted to focus primarily on the tail and making sure that you see these transformations happen with the tail. So let's go ahead and talk about the design that came up with this in mind. So the main thing we wanted to focus on is that over time, the tail would build up something where it would apply some kind of status ailment to the player. So by sharpening its tail, it loses that status ailment, but in replace, it is able to have much higher mobility and attack power. So the acidic Glavenus is actually most dangerous right after it sharpens its tail, so we wanted to kind of use that as a focus point for the gameplay. So at this point, we didn't actually know what kind of status ailment or that the tail would apply, so we just primarily focused on like, okay, what kind of difference can we make on the look of the tail itself? So because it's a monster very focused on the tail itself, because the original form has a tail that's shaped like a greatsword, we decided to see like, okay, maybe we can kind of deviate from that, have the scales of the tail stand up a little bit and make it look closer to that of an axe. So on the bottom, you can see this is another idea that we had was like, okay, maybe we can have something growing out of the bottom of its tail and have it look more closer to that of like a chainsaw. But with the original concept, we wanted to make sure that like, okay, you can visually see that there's something growing on the tail, and when it sharpens it, the tail, those things are gone. We wanted to make sure that like that's very apparent to the player, and that's not something that this design fulfills. So at this point, we decided to scrap this concept. And this is the next step of the concept design. So this is taking into mind that like over time, it's going to see some changes to its physical appearance. So what you see in the top is that it has kind of poison built up in its mouth, and so when it sharpens its tail, it's applying that poison to its tail. So what you see on the bottom is it has more like acid slowly secreting out of it, so that when it whips its tail around, it's actually throwing that acid out. This satisfies the fact that like, okay, there's a variation in the color itself, but we wanted to take it a step further, and we're like, okay, let's not just make it the color. We wanted to make sure that the shape, the silhouette of the monster is also different. So at this point, we decided to scrap these concepts as well. So this is the final form that we ended up with, taking into account that like, okay, you're gonna see some changes over time, and making sure that the tail looks a little bit different. So you notice that the tail itself is shaped a little bit closer to that of a katana. So very much kind of have that image in mind that like, okay, when it's sharpened, that's when it's strongest. So with the original Glavenus, because the tail is shaped more like a greatsword, it's a little bit slower. So that's why we decided to shift the sword, so to speak, to that of a katana. So we wanted to depict that like, okay, this is a faster and more mobile Glavenus that's able to execute faster combos. So from that katana-like tail, we would have kind of acid slowly secrete out over time, and that acid would solidify into these like acidic crystals. So when it has those like acidic crystals kind of solidified on the tail, it does make the Glavenus slower, but at the same time, now it has an ability where when it hits you with its tail, it's able to lower your defense. So the design very much has two states into consideration, where it's like, okay, it has a much more mobile, more damage output version, and then you have the other state where it's like a little bit slower, but then it's able to do a lot more status ailments too. So now that we had the final design of it, we started to do a little bit of research of like, okay, how do we want the animation of the tail to look like?
ゲーム中でどのような
Let's go ahead and see all of this in action. So what you saw was the Glavenus with the acidic crystals on it, so the speed of it is closer to that of a regular Glavenus. But again, it is a little bit slower, but it has that acid built into the tail, so it's able to kind of attack with it and kind of throw it around, and really has that opportunity of lowering the player's defense. When enough acidic crystals are kind of built up onto the tail, that's when it's going to sharpen all the crystals away, and that's where you have the sharpened state, where it's a lot faster and a lot more powerful. When it's in this state, it's a lot more mobile and uses its katana-like tail to execute a lot of combo attacks. So it's up to the player to make sure, like, okay, know what's happening and make sure to maneuver around as best as possible. But again, over time, it's going to slowly build up those crystals on its tail, and it's going to go back to the speed of that as if it's kind of like the regular Glavenus with the greatsword tail. So game design very much is about, okay, making sure that you avoid getting that acid applied to you, making sure that you don't get your defense lowered, and understanding like, okay, how do I maneuver around when it's in its sharpened state, when it's the quickest. So that was just a small introduction to the subspecies that you see in Iceborne, but we will have a lot more subspecies to introduce, so please stay tuned.
登場してきます。今後どのように彼らが変化していくのかっていうのを楽しみにしていてくれたらと思います。Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And thank you again, Fujioka-san, for putting that together. And all that gameplay that you saw, all the clips, the Acidic Glavenus reveal, all brand new for Comic-Con. So really want to do something special for everybody. So thank you again. And thank you again for coming. Quick reminder, Monster Hunter World Iceborne is coming out on September 6th for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, with a PC release to follow this winter. Again, the expansion can be purchased on its own, or if you're a brand new player, you can buy the Master Edition, which has them both bundled together. And couple other things going on at our booth. You can come down to our booth right now and play the demo. There's 3 quests you can choose from: beginner, intermediate, and hard. There's a couple of photo ops going on down there. You can take photo with our Palico. And also come down for signing sessions with an Iceborne poster. So come down today from 5 to 6, tomorrow 1:30 to 2:30, 5:30 to 6:30 as well. So yeah, well, hopefully we'll see you down at the booth. And also just a reminder, if you're a new player or you were waiting for 2 panels from now, and you don't have Monster Hunter World, the base game, it's on sale right now. You can pick it up starting even at $19.99 for the disc at GameStop, PS4 and Xbox One disc. It's also on digital as well. And as we get closer to Iceborne, all the in-game festivals are coming back as well. So if you missed out on any of that seasonal layered armor or any of the other things you could get from all the event quests, now's a great time to catch up and get ready for Iceborne, because Master Rank is a doozy. So look forward to everybody playing, and happy hunting. Thank you, everybody.